Okay, everyone, welcome back to the Doomer Optimism podcast. I'm here with Alan Kopschel of Plough Magazine. And Alan and I met at this event I organized in Margaretville, New York with Paul Kingsnorth and Matt Crawford. When we crossed paths, he was telling me some really interesting stuff about this community he lives in and Plough. And I feel like it's such an interesting little subculture, and I want to talk to you about it. I think like a very important and growing one, and it kind of touches on a lot of the themes that we're interested in Doomer optimism, which is partially like I'm interested in these kind of alternatives people are developing that then could maybe a lot of people are talking about like pronatalism, antinatalism, like just by natural demographic trends can inherit the earth. So I feel like your particular community is really traditional in some ways. So I want to just like hear about how it works. I want to hear about Plough. And then we had talked about this internship that you guys have
Yes.
on your property. So I want to talk about that too at the end and tell people about it because that's a super cool opportunity. So we'll get into it, but I'll just have you introduce yourself briefly first, and then we'll start talking.
Sure. So, as Ashley said, I'm Alan Kopschel. I'm an editor at Plough Magazine. I'm a member of the Bruderhof communities, and I'm sure we'll talk about what that is shortly. But I was raised mostly in the UK, actually, in a Bruderhof community there, and now live in Walden, New York, where Plough's offices are based. Um, and I live in this community of about 200 people in this specific location. We all share everything, so none of us own anything. We live together quite intentionally, so we share kitchens and fridges and houses. We meet together regularly. We work together a lot, and it's sort of community in the most complete sense of the word. Um, Pretty much every aspect of our lives are lived communally, which is a really fun thing, I think.
Yeah, okay. So I'll start by saying I've had multiple conversations on this podcast about my own experiences in various intentional communities throughout the world, which were mostly negative. I mostly worked on different organic farms in different places, and I would say like a lot of these intentional communities were, I'd put them in the category of like leftist, experimental, usually without a coherent value system or ideology.
Right.
My take on those kinds of communities after having been in a few of them is that they're very chaotic because they intend to start from scratch, like completely from scratch, every aspect of like human socialization and governance. So like, how do we vote on things? How do we decide who gets what? And like the desire to start fresh makes it very chaotic because you're not like really pulling in anything traditional. And maybe a lot of these communities I was in were like allergic to anything traditional. So then they were like, well, like we're just super smart, we'll reinvent the wheel. And then there ends up being this like constant house meetings and then like, oh, we all have to decide on by consensus, but then there's somebody who's a holdout and then they're the real one who has power, like just all this like crazy dynamics. So I'll just start by saying like I in general have a very strong skepticism based on those experiences. But it sounds like your community is totally different in the sense of like where it came from. And one of the really interesting dynamics on Doomer Optimism is that kind of my early adulthood has been very like steeped in these like left leaning alternatives and explorations. And I've got a bunch of friends now, like including Paul McNeil, who spent a lot of time in these right leaning like experimental alternatives. So it's cool to
Right.
like compare notes. So I'll just say that as background. First, I want to ask you a little bit about the history of Bruderhof. Like, is it tied up with American history necessarily, or does it go back to Europe?
Well, so actually, it was founded in Germany in 1920. So
Okay.
it's relatively well, we're 100 years old, and it's German in its origins. So
Okay.
it was founded by a German theologian and his wife's sister. So sort of the three of them. They were living in they were sort of upper class Berlin socialites, the Eberhard Arnold, who was the one of the founders, had just finished his degree in philosophy, had written his PhD on Nietzsche and Christian and unchristian ideas in Nietzsche, and was also reading the Sermon on the Mount, which is a part of Matthew's Gospel where Jesus preaches some of his most famous words about loving your enemies, about going the extra mile, about turning the other cheek, about nonviolence, and a lot of other things. And he and his wife's sister were reading this along with other people in Berlin, and were kind of convicted by it and realized that the sort of upper class pietistic Christianity that they were living out in Berlin just didn't really reflect what they had been told to, what Christ had taught in that in the Sermon on the Mount and in other places in the Bible, that said love your neighbors, and it didn't seem like they really were loving their neighbors in the way that they ought to be. So they kind of took the jump and sold their rich Berlin house, sold everything they had, moved to rural Germany, and they got this farm there and started sharing everything with pretty much anyone who would want to come and join them. And it grew relatively quickly, um, and was primarily farming. And then they also had a publishing branch. That's where Plough was founded. Well, it was called Neue Werk, which means the new work, and then Flug, which is plow in German. But is where Plough was founded. So the magazine has been tied to the Bruderhof, or the publication has been tied to the Bruderhof for pretty much its entire the entire history of the Bruderhof. So in Germany in 1920, of course, it was right before Hitler's rise to power, and here was this pacifistic community that was radically sort of Christian socialist. They would accept anyone who came. They practiced radical hospitality. There was tramps who would come in off the road. There was single mothers who would bring their kids, and they pretty much welcomed anyone. They didn't turn anyone away unless they were a harm or they were a direct threat to people in the community. Uh, and of course, when Hitler rose to power, he was not the Nazi Party was not very keen on these sort of pacifistic, communistic looking things. So they cracked down pretty hard. There was a few SS raids at the community, and then eventually, then there was this referendum that the Nazi Party held in 1936, where they asked, pretty much, do you endorse the Nazi Party to make the decisions in this country? And the community was quite conflicted about how to respond. They didn't really feel like they could say yes. Well, they couldn't say yes and stay true to their consciences. And they had spoken to the town commissioners and asked them what's the if we say no, what will happen? And they had said pretty much, if you say no, you're likely to get concentration camp. This was not the death camps yet, of course. It was still 1936, but it was quite an intensive prisoner experience that they would have been arrested and sent off to. So they instead pasted this passage onto the referendum, saying pretty much that their allegiance is to a higher authority and not to the authorities of the state. And the very next day, the Nazis raided them again, pretty much told them that their school had to be shut down unless they accepted a Nazi teacher, which of course they weren't going to accept. So overnight, they shipped all the kids off to Liechtenstein, where they had just bought some property. And the kids were educated there. The Nazi teacher arrived the next week and found no children to educate. So um, it didn't quite work out as the Nazis had thought it would. But then very shortly after that, it became they were given 48 hours to leave the country, and had to flee to Liechtenstein and then on to England, where they had friends. So they were pretty much kicked out of the country by the Nazis. In England, they grew up relatively quickly as well, with a lot of sort of the anti-war movement in England had a pretty big following. So a bunch of people came from that, and then as soon as the war started, of course, if you have a community of pacifists who are both German and English, living in rural England during the height of World War II, it's understandable that there's some sort of backlash from neighborhood people and other people. So they were encouraged to find a different place to go. So they asked around. They tried to come to the U.S. Um, and struggled to find a place that would take them. Because of course this was 1940, the height of World War II.
Hmm.
So it was not an easy place to not an easy time to find a place to land if you were German and English. And eventually Paraguay, this little country in South America, said that they would take them and would allow them to have all their religious freedoms, to not fight in the military, um, to live their life as they saw fit. So they got on these um, large ferry liners and took them all down to Paraguay, and had to sort of start from scratch in the jungle. Um, and then after about 20 years in Paraguay, the community moved up to this country, and we've since grown around the U.S., mostly in the Northeast. So there's about 20 communities in the Northeast, I would say, Pennsylvania, New York. Um, there's a bunch in England where I grew up. There's some in Australia. There's some in Austria and in Germany and in Korea and in Paraguay still. So all around the world. Um, but to your point about sort of these tensions that that are inherent in community, I think to a certain extent, but seem to have been far more prevalent in the communities you were a part of. I mean, I think that the primary thing that distinguishes us from that is that we have this sort of common faith as the primary structure of the community. Also, the founder, Eberhard Arnold, and his wife's sister were very adamant that they didn't want to found their own community. And very early on, they looked for other sort of um, communal communal or already existing communities that they could connect themselves with, and they found the Hutterites, which was this sort of Anabaptist, um, well, a strictly Anabaptist movement that's based in Canada, and united with them to a certain extent, adopted a lot of their sort of structures of community, which was incredibly helpful for the structure of the community and for its ability to sort of move from the radical commune to like the functioning community. Um, and that definitely was helpful. It was never the intention of any of the founders to sort of start their own new thing. They just themselves felt convicted by what they saw as hypocrisy in their own faith. So I think that's definitely part of what's helped us not sort of fall into those uh, more problematic ways of doing community, which are definitely possible to fall into. Um,
Yeah. And
it
I
is
want to
very,
hear, yeah, I want to hear some of the practical realities, but I have a couple other like baseline like intro questions. Do you, what is your religion? What do you call it?
well, I mean, we would probably just say we're Christian.
Okay.
We're definitely sort of informed by the Anabaptist strain. So there's a strong emphasis on pacifism, which is an Anabaptist idea. There's a strong emphasis on sort of separation from the state. So no, none of us would hold public office, for example. Um, and then there's the emphasis on community, and those three things are come directly from the Anabaptist movement of the um, Reformation period.
Okay.
Um,
But you
and
don't
that's
necessarily, do you consider yourself like a Protestant
Yeah, I
sect?
mean, probably Protestant because, well, I mean, anyone that's to the extent that anyone that's not Catholic or Orthodox
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
Protestant, then yes, we're Protestant. Um, but yeah, so I mean, we definitely would sort of trace our roots through the Reformation. So I would say probably Protestant.
Okay.
As much as we like to be boxed in, that's
Yeah,
probably how
right.
we allow
Yeah.
ourselves to be boxed
Yeah.
in.
Yeah.
Um, but so there's this Anabaptist strain. There's sort of this some elements of like the pietistic Lutheran tradition, which Eberhard Arnold and Emmy Arnold, his wife, and then Elsa, Emmy's sister, were raised in, have definitely come through. There's some sort of some of the some of the theologians that had strong influences on people like Karl Barth have been incredibly influential in the Bruderhof. Um, and then there's this other element which is not Christian per se, but definitely has a strong influence on our theology. So Eberhard and Emmy, the two founders, were involved in the German youth movement, which was this sort of romantic turn after World War One, well, before and after World War One, of these young German youth who were completely disillusioned with the state apparatus, completely disillusioned with sort of, I mean, in the Deemer optimism language, with the machine,
Yeah.
and tried to sort of return to nature. Went hiking in the woods, met outside, and we've definitely inherited a lot of that sort of romantic, or I guess you could call it sort of a romanticism. Um, and and during summer, a lot of our sort of church services take place outside. We do campfires. We do a lot of singing of like nature songs with the kids. The kids do tons of stuff outside. Of course, there's always been like an agricultural element to the community, which is similarly, I think, comes from a similar strain. So those are kind of the things that have informed us, and so I wouldn't necessarily say we're sort of strictly Anabaptist per se, although if you had to box us in, that's probably where we would be boxed in. But
Okay, that makes sense. And then, like, just does each community kind of develop its own subculture, or are you in connect or like in conversation with the other communities?
so we're the overall it's around 3,000 people, so we're relatively small.
Mhm.
But then there is like a very close sort of working together between all the communities. And for example, Plough, the who I work for, our publishing house. Um, if So I live in Fox Hill, which is the Bruderhof where Plough is based. And if say I just if I was asked to start working for the business, so we have two businesses. One is called Rift, and it makes equipment for people with disabilities. And then the other business is a factory that makes daycare equipment and furniture for daycares and nurseries. So playthings and chairs and
Mm.
um, sort of outdoor play equipment for kids. And if I was asked to go work in the sales or in marketing for either of those businesses, I would probably move to a different community to do that work. Um, uh, so there is sort of a we there's a lot of sort of cross community pollination, I guess you could say.
Okay.
And we do still share everything across all communities. So there is a complete common ownership across all communities. So that sort of facilitates a lot of working together just naturally by the nature of the structure.
Okay. Okay. And then, is there any kind of like particular ethnicity that is drawn to Bruderhof, or is it kind of just like open?
Well, I would say um, I mean, anyone can join. It's not, there's not sort of there's certainly no sort of
Or
like,
not like that there are rules against it, but is there like a certain type that seems to be attracted to?
I mean, so a lot of our members are people that are like, I'm a third generation, child of the Birdhof. So like my grandparents joined.
Okay.
So that's
So
where
it
a
would be
lot of,
German
yeah, so there's
based.
a lot of the German sort of, but then a lot of Americans joined in the 60s when we moved to when the Birdhof moved to the US. A lot of Brits joined in the 30s when we were in the UK. So there's some German elements, there's some English elements, there's some American elements. We've had a pretty large influx of people from Korea over the last years,
Right.
for whatever reason. I'm not 100% sure, but they're all awesome people,
Yeah.
and and it's a really fascinating sort of cultural shakeup. Like we now like have someone who cooks Korean food, and we do Korean eat cultural evenings, which is really fun and kind of helps to spice up our calendar a bit. From It's not just sort of the bog standard German holidays.
That's
So
funny.
yeah.
Okay, wait, and then a couple of other things. I'm curious. Well, first of all, I just a comment. Paraguay seems to be like this weird country that attracts a lot of. I mean, I lived in Uruguay for a long time, so
Right.
I understand this kind of like desire to flee to South America, and there's a little bit of it in Uruguay, but Paraguay, for some reason, of all places, it's like the jungle. It's
Yeah.
landlocked, but there's like a bunch of Amish and Mennonite, and I don't know if they just like were more open relative to other countries at times in history where it was necessary for people to flee for religious freedom for or whatever else. But
I think there was also a pretty big sort of population dearth following, I think, the Chaco War, I think it was, which was like a lot of the reason that motivated the government to accept this large influx of people.
it's just
So
such
they were
a
like,
it's like
yeah,
such a mind warp too because you see these like communities and they're literally dressed in some of like the Amish
right,
clothing and they're like just European based white people and then they're just like in the jungles of Paraguay.
yeah.
It's such a weird thing, but it is just has been a country where people have fled to. And then okay, so now I'm curious about like the free rider problem or bad actors coming in taking advantage of like the communal element of your like good faith desire to share. What do you do about that?
I don't know if it's necessarily been that large a problem. So, I mean, guests are welcome to come whenever, but actual people who, so like for example, I'm a member of the community. I have made vows that include sort of a lifetime commitment to this specific community of people. Um, and so that necessarily facilitates my sort of buy-in because this is my place that I've committed to. Uh, but then as far as like guests coming, it's I can't think of a single. Well, I'm sure there are examples of people who have come and freeloaded, but it's certainly not been a problem to the point where we've had to like sort of implement some sort of uh, way of sort of getting rid of that problem. So I guess I mean
Like so
there definitely is the
when you take a vow, you have certain responsibilities that come with that.
yeah. So when I became a member, and I probably should have said this from the off, when I became a member of the community, I committed. Firstly, it's a lifetime commitment. Secondly, it was a commitment to give all my faculties and all my strengths to the community and to Christ. Um, and then finally also to agree to go where I'm asked, to work where I'm asked. So it's very monastic in that sense. There is a sort of very monastic element to the way the place runs and operates, and or how we see ourselves. Um, there is a sense that like I have given I have given over my I have given over my the next 50 years of my life for the rest of my life to the community and to Christ, and that just means that I will work as hard as I can and do everything in my power to serve the community and serve Christ.
Okay.
So that I think definitely helps because it's similar to monastic community. I mean, I'm sure maybe there are monastic communities where they have a problem with freeloaders, but I think the sort of rigor of the commitment that's required means
Yeah.
that freeloaders are kind of scared away. Um,
Well, and
but
like
yeah,
I'd be curious to hear too, like what the expectations for daily life and work are, because part of the freeloader problem on the communities I've uh been a visitor to is like the expectation that they can kind of just like take the fruits of the community, including like food or whatever else or housing, but not really expect to work or get mad about the work that they're expected to do.
right,
Um,
right.
yeah, so I'd be curious to hear like how do you decide does the community decide what kinds of work expectations what the expectations are for work for all the members and then like governance like how does governance work with that?
Okay, well, I'll start with the work question. I mean, I can go through my schedule, which is perhaps a pretty comparable schedule with most of the folks here. So I start work at 7:30 in the morning. I show up at our factory here, where we make furniture for daycares and nurseries. And I was put an hour and a half working there. So I work with a bunch of guys, um, making chairs is what we do. And I do that for an hour and a half. So like not what I was trained to do, not what I'm like, not what I see as like my job in the community necessarily, but it's the thing that needs doing, and therefore I help out. Um, and then at 9 o'clock, I go to my office with the Plough. I do all sorts of sort of basic editorial stuff. Um, and then that goes till noon. Then we have communal lunch together. So I go down. Some days I'll go down early and like help dish up the food and make sure everything's ready with the food. Um, and then following the lunch, all the guys do the dishes. So um, all the men head to the dish sink right after lunch,
Are the women
and
cooking and the men doing dishes?
uh,
Kind of.
the women, yeah, kind of. But
I love
the
that.
men, yeah, the men do the dishes is definitely a pretty strongly practiced tradition. So yeah, I'll go to the dish sink, and then after that, I come back to my office, work till 5, and then the evening is either there's a meeting of some sort or our youth group will do something together. Um, but anyway, so that's a pretty standard schedule for most people. Work starts at 7:30. There's a lunch at noon, and then work quits at 5. Um, and there's a sense that like people will do that. And everyone kind of has a job. And if there's work that needs to be done and there's someone that doesn't have a job that requires everything of them, then they'll be asked to help out with that. As far as I don't know if that answers the question
Yeah,
about
that
work.
and there's not really an issue with like people not showing up or like making excuses or
Well, yeah. I mean, if there are, then we would address it directly. So one of the things that we try to practice, which I think is integral to the success and the survival of the community, as well is it's from Matthew 18, but it's this idea of direct address. So if I have a problem with someone, instead of chatting shit behind their back about them, I will go straight to them and say, "Listen, I don't like this that you're doing, or you're annoying me by doing this." And then we are both committed to try and work that out together.
mm,
Um, and if we can't find a solution, then we'll get someone else involved. But as a baseline, our first objective is to try and work that out between ourselves, and
I
not to
love
sort of
that.
gossip. Yeah.
I've long
Uh,
thought
there
of the
was
whole idea of like of of atoning for sin as being like a kind of communal process like hey I'm saying directly to you or someone saying directly to me like I don't like that your behavior it hurt me in X Y and Z way and then like directly atoning to the person I feel like is just like such a beautiful first step for these
right.
kinds of things.
I mean, and that wasn't always the case in the community, and inevitably led to quite a bit of conflict. So quite early on in the first years of the community, uh, this it was called the first law of the community, and it starts with the line, "There is no law but love,"
Mm,
and love is joy in others, and then goes on to sort of lay out this idea of like direct address,
mm,
um, and it is kind of integral to I mean, as you probably know from communities where that probably wasn't practiced so much. If you
yep.
are living in really close quarters with people, you inevitably sort of come into conflict, and you have to have a way of dealing with that conflict that doesn't sort of fester and create rifts, and to drive people apart.
Man,
So,
and I'll just say really briefly, like just zooming out a little bit, this is so integral, I think, and something that's happening truly as a result of like overabundance, which is that I was just tweeting about this today. I saw all these statistics on like loneliness and people who just like don't get together. And we have kind of either implicitly or explicitly um, farmed out a lot of our social interactions to like just buying things. Like I'm just going to buy things from people. I'm just going to like choose to hire someone for services rather than this like interdependent way of most of human history where we have to work together, we have to work in close quarters, and therefore we have to figure out ways to like resolve conflict. And I just think this is such a radical and integral and important like life skill, which is to be able to work with people, ask for things, give things, and work out conflict. And it's just super cool that that's like a central tenet of how you manage things. So I feel like it's kind of this um, false sense of we've sort of externalized the need to do this kind of thing because we just
Right.
buy all our food from DoorDash or whatever. We don't have any like requirement to rely on one another. And so,
Right.
we just sort of think like, oh, well, we don't have to have those skills. And then that's what sort of leads to people saying like, I'm just going to cut people out of my life. Whoever like bothers me even the slightest bit, I'm just going to cut them out. And then you just end up in this society where people are totally lonely and sitting alone all the
Right.
time and buying things all the time, and there's like no social connection. So it's like so super radical on the other side. I love that.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that if you sort of lose the sense of dependence on other people, you well, it's an understandable route to take because the conflict in human life comes from being dependent and
Yeah.
being and interacting with other people. And as soon as you lose that, you do just loneliness will just become a huge
Right. So
problem.
it's like the connection and meaning that comes from connection is directly in relation to the skill of conflict resolution, which requires quite a bit of humility, and like the ability to, humble yourself and to apologize and to also like be brave enough to say if somebody hurts you and all the
Right.
skills that come with that. Like I think I've encountered this so much recently where people like at the slightest bit of conflict, people will shut down and then just start like, gossiping or, saying mean things about one another as opposed to like, let's just handle this head on, let's like, I love you enough to do this conflict resolution with you. It's actually an
Right.
act of love.
Yeah.
I
And I
love
think if
that.
you're, yeah, and I think also like there is because you can just gossip and walk away in sort of broader culture, that's far more normalized. Whereas here, there's a sense in which like I can't really just walk away. I've committed my life to these people, and so like even if I don't like this guy at all, and he really irks me, which does happen, um, then like I have an obligation to work it out with him. Not like I can't just say decide okay I just don't like this guy and sucks to be him.
Yeah, and
Um,
what briefly, if somebody like came to you and was gossiping about somebody else, would you be encouraged to tell them to go handle it directly with
I mean
them?
I like to hope that I would. I probably don't all the time, but
Yeah.
I'd like yes.
Sometimes it's just a matter of like blowing off steam or whatever, but
Right.
yeah.
Sometimes yeah, and sometimes you just have to vent. But as long as it's just like let's just vent and then we will move on.
Yeah.
But it is hard, and like I do have to discipline myself as well to like actually take that seriously.
Yep.
And if I have a problem with someone, not go well, I can probably just bottle that up and move on.
Yeah,
But
right, as opposed to addressing it. And then okay, so then how does the governance work like, if for example they moved you to this other community to go work on something, like how would that decision be made?
so there is a sense. So the one of the things we have taken from the Anabaptists is this idea of like personal autonomy and agency, um, and that's within the communal setting. So, and I think that's really necessary for communities is to have that sense of the individual in a community. And there is a sense of like my beliefs, like it's important that I have my personal beliefs that aren't sort of enforced by somewhere outside of me. But at the same time, for any community like ours, you do need a structure that can sort of bring everything together. So we have an elder who kind of guides the big picture direction of the church. But in no way is he seen as like above anyone else. There's a sense of like this very horizontal hierarchy, and if I want to go talk to him, I can drop him an email and show up that afternoon and have a talk to talk about my problems with him, and I
But
will be
but
listened
kind
to
of
and
like
respected.
a wise mentor type
Yeah, exactly.
position. Okay.
It's less of like a it's less of like a dictator and more of like a mentor,
Okay.
if that makes sense. Like it's
Yeah.
not there's not a sense of like I will like I have to listen to everything this person tells me, and I never can question anything he says. It's very much like no, this is a conversation,
Mm.
and you are part of this conversation as a member of this community, and of course decisions have to be made, but like your voice is as important as anyone's. And with 3,000 people, that's still functional. Like that's still a possible. It's still possible to sort of maintain that level um, of agency within the community. Now I don't know what happens if the Bruderhof grows to 10,000 or 20,000 people, but I'm sure they'll find ways of making it work. But
Yeah, or
currently,
I
this
mean like
this
the a kind of federalist sense of like the
yeah,
different communities then make decisions inside, and you
and we
have
have that currently. Like
representatives.
not like there's a lot of granular sort of intercommunity or various community specific decisions that are made just on a local level. Um, but when it comes to sort of big picture stuff like, oh, the business needs this person that's living in this community to move here, that obviously has to be pulled together more centrally. So in that sense, I think it is pretty federalized, and it is that there is sort of there is sort of a sense of like subsidiarity, and that localized people have. I mean, I think it's back to the personal agency thing. Like it as far down the chain as it can be pushed, it's pushed. But then, of course, at a certain point, you have to have this sort of um, central sort of decision for some decisions.
And then if it came down to, okay, like Alan, you need to move to this other community, and you were like, well, I really want to stay here. What would happen? Like, how does that work?
So if I was like, I mean, I think I would have to myself have a very, very compelling reason for myself to be like, okay, well, I really just am not gonna be able to do that. And usually, if I did have a compelling reason, that would be respected. Well, I think it would be. Uh, so and I think, but there is this sense in which I have committed to go where I'm asked. And so unless it like fundamentally violated my conscience or there was like a really, really compelling reason why it made absolutely no sense, then then I think I probably would just say, okay, well, I've been asked to do this and I have promised to do what I'm asked, so therefore I will do this.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, if there was something, if I was asked to like go do some job that I knew I really just couldn't do, like if I was asked to become a plumber or something, I probably would have to say, well, I probably could be a plumber, but if I was asked to like do something that I most definitely couldn't do, like intensive computer science or something,
Yeah.
I would probably have to sort of beg out of it just on the basis of my inability to actually perform the task that I've been asked to do.
Okay.
Um, but yeah,
It
I don't
seems
know if
like there's
that's.
like just a lot of good faith conversations about like needs versus wants, and then like the functioning and a lot of back and forth. Like there is a hierarchy, there are larger things that need to get prioritized, but then there's like back and forth. It seems like it's just like a pretty functional culture of
Yeah,
discussion.
I think best case scenario, that is how it works. Of course, there are times when that falls down. It doesn't work because we're we're human beings who notoriously just make lots of mistakes.
And then do
Um,
you have like
but
fail safes for situations like that? Like how does it work
um,
out if there's like some situation where there's like a big conflict, there doesn't seem to be like a solution within the rules as you understand them.
I mean, I think the failsafe is just other people holding you accountable.
Hmm.
So because there are in this community 280 people, and then in the broader Bruderhof movement of 3,000 people, there's a lot of people who will smell the shit long before you do, and we'll be
Okay.
able to point it out for you if it's necessary. And like that sort of mutual accountability is super helpful, and I think is probably the only way the only like properly functional failsafe is to just trust that other people
And
will
so
be
how did
watching.
you develop a robust culture like that though that actually works? Like that's the thing. I mean, I know that all of it sounds very similar to the left versions of this that I've encountered, but it actually works. Is it because of the Christian aspect, do you think?
I think it's probably fundamentally because of the Christian aspect, because we have like these incredibly strong first principles that we're starting from. Um, I honestly don't know. I mean, I don't know of any functional commune that has tried to run without. I mean, I know of plenty that have tried. I
Yeah.
know of plenty that have failed,
But
but
I've
I
also
don't know of
I've
any that.
also heard of in the US even communes that were Christian based that rose and fell, but like based on whatever,
Right, right. Oh, sure.
issues that they're
Christian communities can rise and fall, but I don't know of any non-Christian
that
community
have
based
stood
just
the
sort of
test of
on
time. Yep.
exactly. But I do know plenty Christian ones that have and
Yep.
continue to. Um, so I mean, maybe that's just my own personal experience. There might be one out there that I'm not aware of,
Yeah, I
but
don't
like,
know of any either. I mean, the closest thing I've come across to a secular version of what you're describing is, and I'm sure that there are other ones that I haven't come across, but like in Ithaca, New York, right outside Cornell, there is a basically like a sustainable HOA type development where they have like just you buy into these like sustainable properties, and part of buying into it means they have like communal kitchen and like communal bikes and communal things that everyone can share, and they all have to buy like a share in their CSA organic farm that's affiliated with the community. And it's just kind of like the structure is built into the legalese, and so you kind of like have to just follow the HOA. And
Right,
it's
right,
not the same type of community togetherness that you're describing, but it's
right.
a secular version. But the reason it works is because it's built into the legal
That makes
documentation.
sense.
But that's the only thing I've
Interesting.
seen like that.
What are
That's
they called?
not. It's called. I don't know. I'd have to look it up. I
Okay.
know that the place is on Rachel Carson Way or
Oh,
something like
okay.
that.
Yeah.
But I'll look it up and tell you. But okay, I'm
Oh, yeah.
also curious the agricultural element. Either like, is it central to the community? Like, how does the ag element work? Like, who works on the farm? Where does the food go? Like, what's the point of including the agricultural element? Like, I understand why I would want one, but what do you all say is the point of the agricultural community?
I mean, so the agriculture has kind of been in the community since its very earliest years in 1920, and at different times the publishing has been sort of the source of financial income, and at different times the agriculture has been, and then currently the factory, of course, is. But agriculture, there is a I think that there's a value in sort of being close to the ground in a certain sense, like having the ability to touch grass, as people say, like I think is super valuable. And if you can go and like work in your own garden and raise your own vegetables and raise your own cattle and pigs, and have a sense that like, well, firstly have a sense of where your food comes from. I think it's just a really valuable thing, and it also keeps you in touch with like the land that you're living on. And if you had, I think a lot of people sort of that well, I mean, you know this far better than I do, that have this like very large disconnect with where their food comes from, and have a very large disconnect with just the land in general, and may have like large ideas for how to sort of solve the climate crisis, but actually have like never
No
spent any time
practical
in the garden.
experience. So does this
Or
and does
or
this have to do a little bit with this German youth movement, like
It definitely does, I think.
influence? Okay.
I mean, I think there is that sort of sense in which like it's important to be grounded in nature, that has come through, and it does. And like the growing up, well, so I grew up. My grandfather was a sheep farmer, who had spent a lot of time in Wales, as a well, he had grown up in Wales and Western England, on a farm, and so he was a sheep farmer for his whole life. And then when he came to the community, in his, I guess, 20s or 30s, uh, he ran the farm and the garden. So I was always raised on the farm and the garden. Like that was
Mm.
one of the things that I so we always had like when sometimes lambs in spring are orphaned, or their moms can't take care of them. So we would raise them, my siblings and I. You would go down with your bottle in the
Oh, that's
morning
so
and like
cute.
bottle feed the cat. Yeah, bottle
Yeah.
feed the lamb. It was really fun. Or you help with lambing, or calving.
And is the
And
food mostly for internal consumption?
Yeah, so I don't think we're able to produce all our meat and veg, um, but we raise a pretty large percentage of it. Logan, who you met at the conference last October, he's our gardener here, um, and he would have a better sense of how that all fits together. But it is a pretty large percent of our food. We're definitely during the summer months we grow all our vegetables, and we freeze a lot of stuff. So I think for most of the winter months we're eating our own vegetables, and we for the most part eat a lot of our own meat. But to produce all your own meat for 3,000 people is quite a undertaking. So
Yeah.
but we do produce most of our meat, and I think they're hoping to expand the cattle production, going forward. So yeah, it's tons of fun, and it's also just a great thing for kids as well.
Yep. To
I
have
mean,
that as a part of daily
yeah,
life.
I
Just
know from
from
my own personal experience growing up with around animals and sort of in touch with gardening and stuff was super valuable. So yeah,
and do you do any kind of like sustainable regenerative? I know you mentioned this in the internship. Like what's the approach to farming? I mean, I know you're not the one doing it
Yeah, I
though.
can't speak to it with high levels of authority, but they are practicing a lot of regen, especially particularly in the vegetable garden and also with the cattle operation. So they do a lot of sort of no-till practices. They're using cover crops quite extensively
Cool.
um, to sort of help rebuild the biodiversity of the ecosystem. And then they do rotational grazing with the cows.
Oh, great.
So like it's a pretty intensive program that I don't fully understand, but they fenced off like sections of small sections of the pasture, and then the cows sort of intensively graze that
Yeah.
for a few days, and then they move into the next one.
Yep. That's
Uh,
the just like briefly the for those who are not sure or maybe just hearing this for the first time on this podcast, the regenerative thing, especially with animals, is you want to move them through the landscape sort of bunched together in smaller little paddocks and then let those paddocks rest. And then that can sort of like build topsoil and increase biodiversity, even like increase potentially like the first fertility of the land and later stocking rates. It's like a really big, basically you're trying to mimic predation patterns of ruminants. So it would be, bunched together. They would have a predator kind of attacking them. They would move through the landscape and then they wouldn't touch that landscape again for a while. And so that's pretty central to the whole regen ag approach. And so that's cool. That's cool that you guys are doing that.
One
Um,
thing they've started doing is bringing the animals into the garden too, into the vegetable
mm,
garden as well, and like putting them on the broccoli crop is done, putting them on the
that's
brassicas or
great.
whatever,
Yep.
and that seems to work quite well too. So, and of course, like the hooves aerate the soil and do all these things that are really helpful for the vegetable
Yes,
production too.
exactly.
So,
That's so cool, man. That's so cool. And so you guys just decide internally who needs to do the farm work, or
I mean,
is
there's yeah, like here there's a bunch of young guys that run it, and they're kind of the guys that would run the farm. I mean, uh, like obviously I'm more interested in sort of the publishing side of things. So I'm not. I mean, I did work in the in the organic garden for 2 years out of high school, but I have since moved on to publishing.
I have so many
And there's a
questions.
bunch of guys.
I have two more questions about how it works, and then
Okay,
I know that there's like I
and there's
could
a bunch of
ask a
guys then
million.
that
Yeah, sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
then there's a bunch of guys that are obviously more interested in farming, so they do the farming. Yeah,
Okay,
that's
briefly, two other questions. One, do you all go to college typically?
yes.
Where? Anywhere?
So
Like
I
go
went
away and
to
come back?
yeah, it depends. So it depends. So I studied philosophy and literature. I went to University of Pittsburgh, um, and then transferred up to Albany, a little Franciscan school up there for my last 2 years, because of COVID primarily.
Mm.
Um, and in both places, both Albany and Pittsburgh, there was a community house in the city. Uh, so we all lived there, and it was a bunch of people my age,
Oh, that's
guys and
fun.
girls. It was really fun. It was like kind of a frat house without all the bad frat house things that make
Yeah.
college life. Yeah. Uh, it was really fun. And we did tons of stuff together. And it's kind of a little community of sorts in the
Oh,
city. It's a bit of
that's
a different,
neat. So
bit
you're
of
like
a
going away, but you're kind of still with members of your community, so you're not like totally disconnected from your whole culture.
yeah. So that's one way of doing it. And then sometimes people just go straight to and live in the dorms, which is also strangely like quite a communal experience.
Yeah.
I think what they find is like their own personal skill growing up in a community is super helpful when you're sort of
Yeah.
living around a bunch of people in dorms,
Yeah.
where there's a lot of sort of similar sharing that's required of you.
Yeah,
Um,
totally, totally.
and I think from my own friends in college, like I think a lot of them sort of had this sense of like, this is awesome. We're hanging out, we're doing tons of stuff with each other. And then once they left college, they kind of lose that to a certain extent because sort of
Yeah,
work life
definitely.
stuff
Um,
gets in the way.
yeah. Okay, one other question about the community that I want to ask about Plough. Gender relations, like how is there are there certain gendered jobs? How do you all deal with like maternity leave or babies being born? Like, are there certain approaches to that? Yeah, just like I know it's a very broad question, but
Yeah. So as far as maternity leave, like one of my colleagues just had a baby. She was out of the office for as long as it took for her to a long time before her pregnancy, before the birth, and for several, at least a month or more after the birth as well. And then she started coming back
And then like how
with
does
higher labor
childcare
frequency.
work?
So then there's sort of like um, home care thing. Like the parents work it out among themselves for until they're first and second, and then there's a school on campus where the kids go. And then for high school, we have our own high school
Okay.
that the kids will go to. They commute to a different community for that because that's sort of in one location where they all come together from across the U.S.
Okay.
And they board there
Okay.
if they live far enough away.
Oh,
Um,
interesting. Okay.
yeah. As far as like gendered jobs, I don't know if any job is like specifically gendered. There is like typically, and I think a lot of this is just like, oh, this was convenient, so we set it up that this is how it works. Like a lot of the women do the cooking,
Hmm.
um,
And the men wash the
uh,
dishes.
and the men wash the dishes. Yeah, the women do a lot of the child care, just because like that's
Yeah.
just the natural structure for it. The but teaching is both men and women do that. Um, uh, as far as like running the farm and stuff like that, that's typically been men's work, but not, I don't think necessarily exclusively.
Hmm.
Um, and then most other jobs are kind of a big mix of everyone.
Okay.
But yeah, as far as like the cooking and the childcare, it is typically the women that work there, but that's only just sort of a fault of history. I don't think there's any sort of strong Uh, I don't think there's any sort of strong sense that like if some guy really wanted to work in the kitchen that he couldn't work in the kitchen.
Yeah, like
It's
some
just
chef mentality. Like I'm gonna
yeah,
bring
exactly.
our food up to the next level. I want to get
Yeah,
in the kitchen.
it's more that like there's just yeah, people yeah, it's just that's how it's kind of worked out. So
Yeah, yeah.
um,
And there's also, I mean, like just being having been like a mom slash working from home type person, like just there's a sense where it's kind of easy to work in the kitchen and maybe have kids around a little bit to some extent. And so like it's different than like sitting on the computer and trying to do computer work with like a kid around, it's like a little
right,
more difficult. So there's just like practical realities, obviously like breastfeeding too, and just like, there's
right,
certain things, just practical realities of these things.
yeah,
Um, okay, so now talk to me a little bit about Plough. Like I know that when we talked in New York, you were saying it's a growing publication, and I had heard of it well before having met you. And I know it's kind of like it just has a big reputation as being like a really high quality magazine, really important Christian magazine, and not necessarily relegated only to the Christian sphere. Like a lot of non-Christians or, maybe Christians across all types of Christianity will read it. So I'm curious, like, tell me a little bit about how you see the magazine and how it's growing and, like where it fits in the broader culture right now.
sure. So Plough is a quarterly magazine. We publish daily online, and then we have a four times a year print journal that comes out. And it's a lot of things. So it's faith, it's culture, it's stories, it's ideas. Um, and we try and thematize each of our issues. So we'll take on a big topic. Like one of our past issues was on freedom. And so we thought about freedom from all sorts of different perspectives. Got a bunch of people to write for us on what freedom is, and or different aspects of freedom. Um, and we'll get writers from across, as you say, from across the Christian perspective, but then also non-Christian writers, so Muslims, Jewish people, atheists, just agnostics as well. There's no sort of sense of like strong like ideological difference. Our strong belief is that like if we have a common understanding of what the future ought to be, so like if a shared sense of what the common good should be, and how we should move a sort of a hopeful, forward-looking solution, then we will publish you on that topic, if you're a good enough writer, of course. Um,
Mhm.
uh, and so we're not gonna say, oh well, he also is Anglican, and therefore we will not publish him. If we have some sort of common ground that we can get together on, we will try to do that.
Mhm.
And so I think that's given us an ability to publish a lot of really interesting people, and bring together a really interesting community of people that are kind of politically homeless. Like there's no sense in which we're a lot of the people that come to Plough, of course, are like politically affiliated, but then there's this large group of people that I think find Plough as their sort of intellectual home, that don't see themselves aligning with any political party, that see themselves as kind of abandoned by a lot of these political movements, not represented, uh, and and I think that we represent that group of people very well, because we have this sense of like, no, our duties lie to a higher place than sort of the political realities of the
Mm.
world around us. But yeah, so our tagline is "Another life is possible," which is this sort of very hopeful, forward-looking idea, and that allows us, I think, to also get away from sort of the petty divisions of that make a lot of more other magazines very sort of ideological and narrow in their focus. And I think also sort of being rooted in the communal experience that well in the community, I think is super helpful to the magazine too, and then it gives us a sense of grounding, and we can actually have these sometimes relatively intellectual discussions, without sounding like we're just sort of stuck in an ivory tower somewhere, because we actually are on
Mhm.
the ground doing the common living and trying to live out the values that we're espousing. Um,
And you
so
mentioned that
yeah,
the magazine is growing quite a bit.
yes, yeah. So I mean, we get yeah, we grow every year. We're looking at ways to keep growing, of course, and yeah, it's really fun. I mean, that's one of the things that I'm kind of going into 2024, 2025 with the objective of achieving, is to get more readers, to get a wider variety of people to engage with the magazine, finding different ways to do that. There's a whole bunch of great options out there that I think would be interesting to explore, but
Yeah, and
also like
it's yeah, go
building
ahead.
common building partnerships with other people who have communities that they're running themselves, more sort of uh, um, like perhaps doing whatever it is they're doing, finding some sort of common ground with people that have a similar goal to
Mm.
us. I think that's yeah, I'm quite excited about it.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, we were talking in New York. It's just so funny, like this tiny, relatively tiny community developing this really kind of magazine that's got quite a big reach, and it's just cool. I mean, you must feel very like proud of that.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I mean, it's very little of my doing, but I do feel like I'm part of something that's really awesome, and I'm quite inspired to work in for Plough every day. It's a really fun place to work, and you do
yep.
feel like you're in a lot of these conversations, um, and a part of the bigger sort of
Yeah, and it's
conversation
kind of like
going
the
on.
best of both worlds because you're bringing a lot of your cultural principles from the Bruderhof into your discernment about what to publish in Plough, but then you are in conversation, not only in conversation, but influencing the conversation with the wider world. Do you
Right.
think about that, like the influential aspect of the magazine and like you're basically just trying to proselytize to some extent or another, like the what you believe to
I
be
don't know if I'd use the
true.
word Yeah, I don't know if I'd use the word proselytize, but I think there is. Yeah, I mean, the purpose of any magazine is to of any small magazine or large magazine is to communicate some idea,
Yeah.
um, or some sort of ethos, and so we're definitely interested in promoting that idea, and the idea for us is this sort of understanding of the common good that we want people to sort of latch onto, that is
Hmm.
that is future oriented, that is positive, that is hopeful, and may not be well for some people it might not be a Christian one. For some people it might not be a Anabaptist or communitarian one, but there is a lot of common ground that we have with a lot of people, like that we can sort of connect over.
Mm.
Um, and so we are definitely interested in like any magazine, and like sort of it growing and promoting and getting larger. But I don't think I wouldn't describe it as proselytization
Because
necessarily.
that would you're
Um,
not necessarily it's not necessarily only a Christian idea. It's more like
exactly.
a vision of the common good that's not that could
Right.
could be secular if you interpret it that way.
Exactly. And I mean, I think ultimately we would want people to come to Christ. I mean, that's the sort of the Christian call, but but like I don't think we're as a magazine that is one of our objectives, of course, but like not in a um, not in like a sort of um, knocking on your door Bible salesman style way. And
Yeah.
I think it's actually a far more effective way of bringing people to your way of thinking is to tell stories and to have conversations and to build friendships and community and relationships rather than sort of presenting them with this sort of well thought through syllogism and hoping that they find it attractive.
Yeah.
Um, I do think that just having community and conversation is just a far more effective way of bringing about change.
Yeah, the more you talk, the more this resonates with like everything I've intuitively been drawn to over the years with, and then now with Doomer Optimism, which is like, the romantic ideals I love, the sort of like civic common good orientation where it's not necessarily about like politics or even about like industry. It's more about like the substrate, the cultural substrate, like the culture that makes us want to be good for one another, and do good things. The subsidiarity I love, and so all of that is just it's wonderful. I'm wondering, before I mean we can talk more if there's anything else we want to talk about with Plough, but I'm wondering how you found the Margaretville event relative to your like goals with Plough.
I mean, I find it fascinating like you say, because there was so much there to resonate with. There was like a sense in which pretty much you never knew the person you were going to be talking to next was like left coded or right coded. It was
Yeah.
kind of cool. It was like this completely sort of politically open space. Like there was no sense in which you could like say, oh, this is definitely like the right wingers, or this is the lefties. There
Yeah.
was all sorts of people, and like there was a lot of people that were like very interested in these sort of alternative, um, sort of anti-machine things. I mean, of course, because that's the nature of the conference. But I think that there is so much that resonates um, with Bruderhof and with Plough, where we're trying to sort of break away from like the state apparatus
Mm,
that is violent and that is oriented towards war and that is capitalistic and like exploits people and beats them down, and trying to sort of live out something that's more true to Christ's vision, but then also like more true to what human flourishing is and more true
right.
to what like the broader sort of common good is. And I mean, I think the two are the same, but from a secular perspective, I think what people see is like this is the utopia we're heading for. Um, or this is sort of the common good that we think is best. Like it's a lot of it is things that were said at the Margaretville conference, and also things that like we tried to practice here in the Bruderhof.
Yeah,
Um,
another thing I think about all the time is that like a lot of people will be really doomery about things, but I genuinely think that when you see flourishing, when you see like good or beautiful things, it pretty much necessarily resonates. And so my
right.
whole thing is like even when I have the events, like I want them to be like fun and beautiful and in a way like demonstrating what is then possible to do more of. And it's not necessarily like that. It's not rocket science. It's really just like get together, set the tone, be open-minded, be pluralistic,
Yeah.
but like
And
demonstrate fun.
the informality of the event was awesome too. Like it felt like we were all kind of, I mean, I think it was by the nature of the event, we were all kind of co-creating it together.
Yeah.
And like there was no sense of like, okay, these are the speakers who will be kept in this green room, and you will never see them except when they are on stage. It was like, no, you can like go to the coffee table with the guy that's speaking and
Yep.
have a conversation and feel like you're kind of on a level playing field.
Yeah. And I
And
think
that
from, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
so, I mean, that just resonated with a lot of like how we do stuff here too. It's like there's no sense of like you're a titled person,
Hierarchy or yeah,
yeah,
or
and
like they're
I'm a
separate
lesser
from
person,
us. Yeah. Yep.
right? So
Yep.
I thought that was really cool,
Yeah.
and it was also like super family friendly. There was kids running around everywhere,
Yeah.
um, which is like when we do plow events, that's one of the things that we try and do. So we do this conference every few years, where we invite a lot of our authors to come, and like we make sure people bring their kids.
Yeah.
And it's really cool. Like it totally, if you're talking about the future of the common good or whatever it is, if you actually have like the future running under your feet because it's like someone's kids,
Yeah.
that that's like seems really important. And if you don't make a space for that, then I don't think you can sort of think that you take the common good seriously, because like that is the future of the common good right there.
Totally, totally.
Um,
Okay, so anything else about Plough I would that we want to talk about? Otherwise, I want to switch to the internship.
oh yeah, I mean that is the yeah, that's the other thing that I could just go straight into that now if you want.
Yeah, I mean, all
Um,
I'll say is that like I'm excited about this internship opportunity because it seems like we were just saying, seeing things in person is really huge, and experiencing things for yourself. And one of the big insights that kind of changed the trajectory of the way I thought about my like life's work and vocation and calling is like, I saw a lot of people learn about the value of small scale agriculture and home food production and home gardens by just seeing themselves and then adopting the practices they saw in person. Like it wasn't papers, it wasn't lectures, it wasn't articles, it was literally like stories and experiences that really changed people. So I think like the internship thing and the fact that you have so many visitors, I think is pretty essential to like kind of showing, not telling. So yeah, so with that, tell me about the internship.
yeah, so it's kind of an offering for all the future Wendell Berries out there. Um, it's it's a publishing internship crossed with a regenerative agriculture internship, and then of course the people that come and attend and participate will be also living in the Bruderhof community, so there'll be like a community element to it as well. So it's a month-long internship from June 2nd through the end of June, and the attendees will take part in day-to-day Bruderhof life. They'll work in Plough and they'll get sort of the inside scoop on publishing, on magazine writing and editing, and they'll get advice from our editors here, on how to write themselves, on how to edit, on how to just do sort of the normal magazine stuff. We'll build in a whole bunch of workshops around that. And then in the afternoons, they'll work in our regenerative garden, with Logan, who you met at the Margarettsville event. And Logan will do a deep dive in regen ag,
Mm.
and we'll teach people sort of the basics, but they'll also like do some like they'll grow vegetables using regenerative agriculture practices. And so I think it will be really fun. I'm really excited to see who comes, but also like what it generates, because I think it will be it's a really interesting mix of things. And yeah, I think it will be really fun.
Yeah, I mean the whole idea of it is sounds like a dream for, you know, a young person, you know, maybe college age in the summer who has a summers off. Like I tried to do my own version of this, like I said at the beginning, doing things through WOOF, which is Worldwide Opportunities on Organic Farms. And mostly I ended up in these, not mostly, but a lot of times I ended up in these weird
Lefty communes.
degenerate
Yeah.
intentional communities that had all sorts of like seething resentment going on. And so that this sounds really cool, like not only the regen ag part but the publishing part. So if you're like a thinking type person who is big on ideas but also like wants some practical experience, I will also say like this dovetails with my work in Uruguay where I brought students to come work on small scale farms, and like just the experience of like actually doing alongside the farmer some of the work of farming, is just like it's really transformative for people who are trying to actually understand what like a practical and lived sustainability looks like. And the students usually leave with a whole new like understanding of food systems broadly because they like didn't really understand how a lot of the practical like material reality or physics of it works until they see it. And I know that's true for me when I went to Uruguay. Like I couldn't
Yeah.
really wrap my head around like the industrial row crop ag versus the regen ag until I saw a lot of it in person. So it sounds really cool. Anything else you
Yeah.
want to say on that?
Well, I just hope people don't let like either element of the internship scare them off. Like I think if you're interested in ag, you'll find a lot of commonality in firstly in Plough, but also just I think it will be a really interesting look into the publishing world, even if you are heading towards being a farmer.
Yep.
And similarly, if you're interested in publishing, the agriculture side shouldn't be intimidating either. Like I think in both cases, it's really good to sort of get that ventilation, and to get that sort of well, intellectual ventilation to both to whatever it is that you do to like get a bit of a view into another world.
Yep.
And it's just I think it could be really helpful in thinking about both agriculture and thinking about publishing. Thinking about agriculture because like your if you can write about like your practices, I mean, there's so many successful farmer authors, um, and similarly in publishing, like it's a really great experience to have some like manual labor under your belt, for
Yeah,
example.
not, I mean, both of these, like for any young person, I feel like both of these are such integral things to like see the nuts and bolts of how it works. Just like whatever field you go into, it'd be really helpful to just have this experience. So, this is so cool. Alan, anything else we didn't discuss that you feel like might be useful to get on the record or clarify or?
I mean, I think this was a really fun conversation, and I do once want to talk to you about the lefty communes, but maybe that's for another day.
I mean, we could just go on and on about like the governance side. Maybe briefly, like what's your initial thing about
I'm
the
just really
lefty
interested in
side?
like any of it. What were the actual problems? If you had
God,
to sort
I'll
of
I'll
nail
name
them
a
down.
few briefly before we
Okay.
end. So the first is that a lot of them are, and I've seen this like all over the place. Oh, by the way, the place in Ithaca is called the Eco Village at Ithaca,
Okay.
and there's like a lot of like eco villages. Um, the main thing is the governance issue. This always happens where people like I even had an experience in Uruguay where I thought like maybe we should open up our property and like let other people come settle here. And then there was like this young group of Germans who wanted to come settle, and we were like kind of just we put our thing up on like intentionalcommunity.org, ic.org, which is a place that I've looked into for a while, and we were going back and forth, and I was telling them like, well, the state of Uruguay will let you put like they'll put solar panels on part of your property, and then you can get the energy from it, and then whatever goes back to the grid you get paid for. Like I don't know whether or not I like this idea, but just telling you it exists, and we're talking about this,
Right.
and then the next meeting they come back and they're like, we decided we don't want the solar panels. And I was just like, wait, hold on, I don't like we don't know what the governance structure is. I like this is our property, we bought it and we own it, like and then I was just like, there's these four adults who have no kids, and I'm like, me and my husband with, two and then eventually three kids, like they're gonna outvote me,
Yeah.
and then
Right.
be in charge of what happens with my family. So I was like, this is so stupid. What am I doing? Like you have to figure out like all the governance stuff before you start like coming into partnership with people. And then like a lot of these eco villages are childless. And speaking of like, to the child-free world, it's like
Right.
they're just like kind of hedonistic, like party places. And then nobody wants to do like, no, there's always this joke of like everybody wants to be the mayor, no one wants to clean the toilets. Like
Yeah.
everybody wants to be in charge. Everybody's got the idea of like their utopian vision of how things would work perfectly. And then nobody wants to like actually do any of the work. Like I know of this
Yeah.
one place where they were saying like it's basically all free, and then there was a conversation where I was like, like in the winter, for example, who cuts the firewood and brings it in like for heat if you're doing wood heating. And the guy's response was like, well, my first thought would be like, why don't I put on a sweater instead of, and I was like, well, but you do actually need firewood. Like, I mean,
Right.
depending on the temperature
Yeah.
outside, like you actually need fire. Like, there's all these weird mental backflips to like avoid like communally driven work. Like I have to do this work because it's good for the community, as
Right.
opposed to like, oh, I'll just do radical self-determination. Like I'll just take care of myself and like not worry about it. And then it just leads to all these resentments, whatever. So I've seen all sorts of things like that, where it's just like various ways where there's no governance structure and people just find ways to like game the system so that they don't have to do as much, and then like they upend the structure. Like have you ever read the article The Tyranny of Structurelessness by Joe Freeman?
No.
Okay, so
Where?
this is a radical feminist who's written a lot of really good and scathing critiques of like leftist experimentation in community, and one
Okay.
hers is a kind of famous anarchist essay that I've read in multiple classes, which was basically like if you have consensus decision making, a lot of times you'll get somebody who will take advantage of the consensus model by dissenting, and then
Right.
they're the de facto leader because you just need to give into their demands to get the consensus. So there's all these ways
Right.
people like game it that are just really
It
bad
essentially
faith
works.
efforts
Yeah.
in like undermining the whole spirit of the thing.
Right.
Um,
That's
so that's why I
fascinating.
ask you about these,
Yeah.
like the free rider problem. But it seems like, based on what you said, like the Christian aspect, the vow to participate in the community, you're kind of stuck with it. So you can't. A lot of times, these people would just move on if they
Right. As soon as shit
were
got too bad.
yeah, if
Yeah.
things got bad, they would just move on. And then yeah, the Christian aspect, and then just like the cultural aspect that we talked about, like just having this
Yeah.
really robust culture that values this sort of like communal thriving to the point that like multiple people will culturally nudge you in the right direction if you're
Yeah.
being a bad actor.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean we do practice consensus decision making here as well, but I guess once again it's down to this idea of like because you're in it for the long haul, um, you kind of aren't going to be sort of the obnoxious dissenter. Um, you're gonna want what's best for the community, which is which yeah. So the and I think it's really important that we do consensus decision making because if as soon as you start to develop factions and have like the group that wanted this decision to be made uh,
Yep.
against the group that wanted the other decision to be made, that just drives divides. And so I think if you can get to the place where like, no, we're all going to get behind this, we're all going to support it, and unless we have like a compelling reason why it makes no sense, then we're going to support it.
And I'm assuming
That's
somebody like the guy who's trying to hack the system wouldn't develop in Bruderhof because you have this like, commitment to the place and this like robust culture where it's just kind of like you don't want to be the one social pariah. Whereas like in this more anarchist leftist thing, it's like, that's what the rule is. I'm going to take advantage of it. Like, I don't really
right.
care what you think, but in your culture, it seems like obviously you would care what people think. You wouldn't want to be the pariah. You do want to
Yeah.
like go along. Yeah.
Right. And there would be a commitment to like holding that person accountable to what they actually believe and not letting them just sort of push their sort of uh, arbitrary point through just because they want to be the pariah.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
cool, man. This is so interesting. I could go on and on. Like as a sociologist, I want to like dissect all of this, but maybe one day I'll just come visit and see it.
Well, you should totally
Um,
come visit.
yeah.
And I mean, honestly, like we do still try to practice the radical hospitality and like welcome anyone who wants to come. So yeah, you guys be more than welcome anytime.
Amazing. I would love
Just
that.
yeah,
Yeah, maybe so summer break will come by.
yeah, that'd be
Um,
cool.
Awesome. All right, Alan, this was so fun. This was such a great conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time and sharing all this. It's
Yeah, for
so
sure.
refreshing to hear like a functional community like this exists, and I can't believe like it was formed in the modern era and it still is
Kind of
going.
wild. Yeah,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
great. It's
Well,
and
thanks a lot, Ashley.
yeah, this was
This
so
was
fun.
tons of fun.
I'll talk to you.
Yeah, for sure. See ya.
Bye.